Welcome to the fourth and final informational webinar for this year's application cycle. This is the informational webinar for WPI State 2018-19. We're so excited that you're interested in WPI and you're interested in being here with us, so thank you. My name is Tania Flores. I'm a Senior Program Associate with WPI. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'll be co-presenting today with our Chief Strategist of Policy Advocacy and Training and the Director and Founder of the WPI, Marge Plum. Marge's pronouns are they, them, theirs. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping matters that I'd like to go over. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have everyone on mute for the duration of the call. In the interest of preserving sound quality, please do not unmute yourself at any point. So if you did unmute yourself when you called in, please remute yourself by pressing *6. So again, if you unmuted, press *6 to remute yourself. That will just help us preserve sound quality for everyone. And if you do have any questions at any point during the call, you can comment through the Q&A box, as many of you have already done. And please feel free to send in comments through the Q&A box as well. If it's something that should be answered during the Q&A portion of the call, we may reserve it. So the fact that we don't answer it doesn't mean that we are ignoring you. It just means that we are saving it for the Q&A portion of the call. And the Q&A comments and questions do come to us directly before they go to the whole group. So don't worry about that if that was a concern for you. And during the Q&A portion of the call, again, we will be using the Q&A box. So just use that to communicate with us. Again, please do not unmute yourself. Finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar along with a copy of the slides from today's presentation to all of you who are attending. So if you have any conflict that prevents you from participating in all of today's webinar, just know that you will receive a recording where you'll be able to watch the rest of the webinar. Or if you want to rewatch it, you'll have the opportunity to do so as well. So I'm going to start by going over the agenda for today. I will begin by telling you about the Women's Foundation of California, our mission, vision, and values. For those of you who don't know, the Women's Foundation of California is the organization that houses the WPI. The WPI is the flagship program of the Women's Foundation. So I'll tell you a little bit more about who we are as an organization. Then Marge will talk to you about the history of WPI, why we created WPI, what our social justice framework is, some successes that we've had, the structure of the program. I'll then tell you about current WPI legislation so that you can hear a little bit about what this year's fellows and this year's teams are working on. And then we actually have a current fellow on the call, and that current fellow is Amber Rose Howard. And Amber Rose will tell you about her experience in the program, and you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have for our current fellow during the Q&A portion. And Amber will stay on to answer any questions that you have. So this is a really great opportunity for you all to chat with someone who is a current fellow. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the application process, and then finally we'll close with Q&A. All right, so to begin, I would like to talk to you about the Women's Foundation of California. So for those of you who don't know, the Women's Foundation of California is a statewide publicly supported foundation dedicated to achieving gender, racial, and economic justice by centering the experience and expertise of the communities most impacted by systemic injustice. We were founded on the belief that those who experience injustice are also those who are best suited to develop solutions that will work in the context of their communities. That's something you'll hear us say a lot. It's key to how we do our work and why we do it. We're defined by a feminist, intersectional, progressive, multi-issue movement building approach. And our core values as an organization are community, justice, and well-being. In terms of our work, we work to invest in, train, and connect community leaders to advance gender, racial, and economic justice. We do that by providing grants to community-led organizations. We train community-based leaders through our renowned Women's Policy Institute. And we foster a community of advocates, donors, policymakers, grant makers, academics, and many others through convenings to share knowledge and strengthen the social justice movement in California. As you know, today we'll be focusing on the train portion of the Women's Foundation strategy, which is the Women's Policy Institute. We'd also like to mention that as an organization based on gender justice, we recognize that more often than not, gender-based discrimination and violence disproportionately impacts transgender people. The WPI is open to transgender women, non-binary and genderqueer people, and transgender men, as well as cisgender women. The Women's Policy Institute, as I said, is the flagship program of the Women's Foundation of California. We're celebrating our 15th, the end of our 15th year, which is super exciting, a really big anniversary for us. So this class that is completing their fellowship this year, which Amber Rose, as I mentioned, is a part of, is the 15th WPI State class. So you all, if you do apply and are admitted to the program, would be the 16th class of WPI State. WPI State is widely recognized as one of the most successful policy advocacy training programs in the U.S. And at this point in the presentation, I'd like to introduce Marge Plum, who is the founder and director of the Women's Policy Institute and is the chief strategist of policy advocacy and training. And as I said, they will tell you a little bit more about the program.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you everyone for being on the call. We're really excited about the enthusiasm for the WPI and your interest in applying this year. We're going to try to give you as much information as we can that will help you really think through, is this the right training program for you? Is this the right year for you? So that you can make sure that your application and is cognizant of kind of who the program is, what the program is, and how it operates. So we're going to give you that information, and then you're going to decide, are you going to get your application in on time? Tanya, thank you again. You are such a tremendous partner in this program, in both running the program and the way you manage the informational webinars and the application process is just solid, superb, amazing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So let me talk a little bit about the history of the Women's Policy Institute, because I think it's important to understand how we came to this idea. The foundation launched the WPI in 2003, so as Tanya said, 15 years ago. The foundation had hired an evaluator to look at at that point, what it had been primarily doing, which was grant making, to look at its grant making. And the evaluator came back and said, y'all give great grants, and the organizations you give the money to do really great work. But the evaluator noted that nothing was changing in kind of the fundamental conditions of people's lives. So, where the foundation may have given, funding to a domestic violence organization, domestic violence wasn't changing, or to a, food bank, people were still hungry. And so they wanted to figure out, why is this? What's going on? And one of the interesting aspects was they actually presented their evaluation at a what we call an informational hearing. So it's not an official hearing, but it's a hearing where people are going to be taught something or given some information at an informational hearing in Sacramento, in the Capitol, and there were hardly any women in the audience. Staffers come to those, other advocates come to those, and there were hardly any women. And The executive director of the Women's Foundation walked out and said, actually asked several people, including myself, what are we going to do? We need more women. We need more people who understand gender-based violence and discrimination in the Capitol. And so the foundation embarked on a 2-year process to figure out how do we get more people in the Capitol who understand gender-based discrimination and violence. And so what we came up with was a training program, and we came up with the structure of the Women's Policy Institute. So basically the Institute takes 25 to 30 individuals every year, and it is a year-long intensive training program. Our goal is to teach community-based leaders how to be effective advocates and create tangible policy changes for their communities. Through 2014, we have, just in the WPI year, passed 32 bills that have been signed into law, and we have trained more than 450 leaders in public policy. In 2015, some of you may have heard, we expanded our program to the local level, and so we now have a WPI local. We are in the 4th year of that program, and that trains advocates how to do local level policy advocacy, so city, county, school districts, that type of thing. The current application period, the one you're on the call for right now, is for WPI State. WPI local application will be released in December and will be due in January. So if you're here thinking this is WPI local, you have to wait another 6 months. So the second piece that we looked at, that we developed basically, was why a training, why an institute, and what our goals were. So certainly primarily our theory of change, again, rests on the belief that individuals who are experiencing gender, racial, and economic injustice need to be brought into the policy process, and that only with that will we be able to advance an equitable, just policy agenda for all Californians. Our goals are to increase the number of cisgender and transgender women, non-binary and genderqueer people, and transgender men involved in the policy arena, and to increase the number of policies that reflect the needs and realities of communities of color, immigrant communities, low-income communities, queer communities, and rural communities. And so usually our acceptance is just incredibly high in the communities that we are trying to train to have this impact. So it's a very diverse cohort. We aim to strengthen the leadership, advocacy, and public policy knowledge of participants so that the skill sets can actually be applied at the local, state, and national level. And we see our alumni go off and, in fact, do that very thing. We are also working to strengthen links between grassroots organizations and policymakers, and encouraging lasting relationships among grassroots leaders. Tanya mentioned our social justice framework, and I want to just make one kind of point about our social justice framework. So it's important to understand that the WPI exists because our communities have been historically excluded from the policy process and the outcomes of public policy, and that is primarily because of structural inequities, which are embedded in institutions such as government. Ultimately, we believe that the policy process itself has to change and become more open and accessible to our communities. As a statement for the WPI, we believe, our truth is that we believe that we need to first understand the process in order to change it. So that's why we're teaching you a process that we actually disagree with. We're teaching you how to create public policy through the state in a system, in a way that public policy is created, that we don't think is equitable, we don't think is inclusive, we don't think is collaborative. But we want you to learn how to do policy the way it is currently being done, and then we believe that we will be able to continue to come together to critique the system in the future to hopefully make changes in the system, to change who's elected, and those type of things. So why am I talking to you about that the system is racist and sexist and homophobic and ableist and transphobic, and it basically embodies the very things that we're trying to change? Because you need to decide for yourself, can you deal with that for a year? We don't ask you to be quiet. We don't ask you to not call out when something's happening in the system that you think is inappropriate, perpetuates the isms that I talked about. We don't ask you to be quiet, but we do ask you to understand that that is the current system, and there's only so much change you can make in that system by calling it out. And so we want you to know, like, if you're, at a part of your life, your personal life, your work life, where, kind of the idea of sitting in an audience and listening to a legislator say something racist or homophobic or sexist just would really be harmful to you, then this is maybe not a good year for you. You may want to do the work that you need to do in order to kind of be able to be present for that without it harming you. So just think about, what we're offering you. Sometimes folks apply to the WPI and they think, wow, progressive, and this progressive, righteous group of folks, and, this is going to be awesome. And then, their first experience with the legislature is, holy crud, that's horrible. And we just want to make sure that you're stepping into this fully aware of what you're stepping into. We try to create a safe place in the retreats. Not always successful, but we work on it really hard. But we cannot create a safe place in the legislature, unfortunately. So WPI, wild, amazing successes. We did do a 10-year evaluation and found that 76% of our alumni were still engaged in policy advocacy. And so when we say we've passed 32 bills into law in the first 14 years, because most of our bills are alive right now, that doesn't include all of the new laws that alumni have created. But definitely, folks come into the WPI and they leave knowing how to do policy advocacy, and they keep doing that. Some run for office, some become staffers, some go to school and get a master's in public policy, and some, create a policy advocacy department in their organization and keep working on public policy. We are, additionally, one of the great successes of the WPI is that the fellows who come into the program, you will leave with probably 100 contacts, at least 50 to 100. I have a slight tendency to exaggerate. 50 to 100 contacts of advocates, lobbyists, government employees, legislative staffers, legislators, including Senator Holly Mitchell, who's just an amazing human being and has done tremendous work for all of our communities. So WPI isn't just about learning, but it is also about connecting and about having those connections for a very, very long time. We hear from alumni all the time that they're years afterwards, they'll call a lobbyist that they met or a staffer that they met to talk about policy things. So that's a really essential point. It's important for you also to make sure that the training program itself is a way that is okay for you to learn. Some people don't do webinar trainings, because they don't learn by phone. They need to be present. So everybody has a different way of learning. We want to make sure you understand how our program teaches, so that you can determine whether that's a good way for you to learn. So first is WPI is team-based. We accept applicants into teams of 5 by issue area. So, health, criminal justice, those are issue areas. We'll accept 5 people in each of the issue areas. So it's really important that you know how to work well with others. If you've gotten feedback recently that you're not a good team player, WPI may not be a good training program for you, because you go right into the deep end of the pool with 4 other people, and you need to be able to compromise. You may need to be able to communicate well, work out differences. We help. We do some training in communication and team-based trainings, but really you're focused on the bill and the policy, so you don't get a lot of training around that. So definitely make sure that you work well with people. The other issue to think about is, because we put teams together in teams of 5, and the issue areas are really broad. Criminal justice, that could be reentry, that could be dismantling the prison industrial complex, that could be, tampons for, for women who are in jail. I mean, there's lots of things that fit under criminal justice or fit under each of the other 4 issue areas. Sometimes when we're applying for things, we're like, I'm not going to tell anybody else because I'll have a better chance of getting in. Well, actually, you have a better chance of getting in if more people who do the kind of work you do apply. We've had folks who are just individually, amazing, would be tremendous in the WPI, but they work on such a niche area in the issue area that they would never be able to work with 4 other people to come up with a bill, because their experience in health is just about training medical providers. It doesn't have anything to do with other areas, and we have no one else who does what you do. So the best thing you could do, if you're interested in being the WPI and you want to actually work the system to be better for you, find 4 other people who work in the area, in a specific area that you do, and encourage them to apply. Sometimes we have to say no to really excellent individual candidates because we have nobody else who works in the area that they work. The second thing is to understand that this is experiential learning, or what we call learning while doing. You're not sitting in a chair listening to a bunch of lectures. You will get a lecture or 2, and then you have to immediately make it real and start putting it to work. And so, just know that you're going to come up and you're going to start working on real policy the first retreat. The other thing is, in order to do that, you have to own the policy project. You have to own the bill. So if you have a bill, you and your team have a bill, and 6 months in you get bored, or something happens and you need to leave, it's that's going to be a problem. The 4 people who are working on that bill on your team are going to be 1 person down. So, you are not working on bills for the Women's Foundation or for the WPI. These are your projects. Another piece to that that's really important, and as you're applying, you're going to see that there's a form that you have to fill out, and that also includes your supervisor initialing that they understand the rules. They understand how the WPI, what the requirements are. One of those requirements is that your agency says, yes, we want this person to be trained through the Women's Policy Institute, even if they're working on something that our agency is not working on or is not a priority for our agency. Worst possible scenario, your supervisor kind of, blindly initials things, doesn't really read things. You and your supervisor don't have a conversation about it. Your team chooses a bill by December, which is the second retreat, and your agency turns around and says, oh, you're working on that bill? Well, we don't have anything to do with that, or we're not interested in having that as a priority. You need to leave the fellowship. Again, your team goes down to 4, and that's going to be really harmful. So your supervisors need to understand that this is not an opportunity for you to get a policy and agenda passed during the WPI year. That's for after you're trained. This is for you to learn how to do public policy, even if it's a bill that your agency isn't like super excited about, so that the following year you run bills for your agency that they're super excited about. The third component is that individual leadership development occurs in the WPI. We don't set out to be a leadership development program, but because you're going to be operating in a way you probably haven't operated before, speaking in front of legislators and, at hearings and doing lobbying and dealing with opposition, and it's pretty intense. All of your stuff's going to come up. So, if you, think you're not good enough, that's going to come up. If you think that, nobody likes you, that's going to come up. All of that, it's just whenever we're in intense situations, those little parts of us that don't quite work yet, those tend to show really big and tend to be really obvious. So we add in a little bit of leadership development and, are also available as staff to assist you if, again, you're kind of all of a sudden, struggling with something or become aware of something. Alumni report, one of the number one things that they get out of this program is that they grow more confident as individuals, and that's really cool. So we're really proud of that. And then the last thing is just that lots of different movements are going to be in the room, 25, 30 people, 5, 6 issue areas, and sometimes our movements are not necessarily aligned in kind of our beliefs or in our priorities, and sometimes they actually have kind of unintended negative consequences. For a period of time, thankfully it's not true anymore, but for a period of time the domestic violence movement really did a lot of public policy advocacy and got a lot of bills passed and signed into law that actually added jail time for abusers. The criminal justice movement is really actually trying to figure out how do we create a restorative justice process in our communities so that we're not jailing, tremendously high numbers of individuals from our communities. So those two movements kind of were at odds with each other for a while. That comes up in the middle of the retreat. So we'll make space for it, we'll facilitate, we'll help you communicate, but just, sometimes we come in, it's like, I've been working on health for 30 years and I know it. And then somebody in another team will be like, no, you're having an unintended negative consequence with something you're doing, So just be careful, be aware that you're going to get pushed individually. Your movement might get pushed, and we'll be there for you, but you should just know that that's what you're walking into, that's part of the program. So the retreats, you have the dates. Put these in your calendar. If you apply and we interview you and we, come to you and say, yes, we want you in the program, and you say, oh my God, no, I can't believe I overbooked. I can't come to the first retreat. We're going to be like, okay, apply next year. You really have to be at all of the retreats, and you have to be on all of the webinars. So put these in your calendar now, and make sure that you are saving them so that we don't have that conversation if we invite you. The other thing to be aware of, they're exhausting. They're so exhausting. They're really, really tiring. I mean, we pack them. Plus, then you've got teamwork to do. You might have meetings you have to run and do. So do not expect to get a lot of your work done during the retreats. And again, you're going to be better off. The WPI is going to be better off. Your team's going to be better off if you have this conversation with your employer now. These retreats are yours. They are no one can give you work to do during these retreats because you seriously are not going to have the time. So really, really, really take care of yourself by making sure your supervisor is really clear. Just quickly, like the retreats are before things need to happen in the legislative process. So, we kind of try to queue you up to get you ready for the next steps. Retreat 1, lots of research. Retreat 2, you're at the point where you have bills that you're going to be pitching to legislative staff. Retreat 3, you're going to start learning how to lobby, how to do hearings, committee hearings. Retreat 4, you're going to start dealing with money. How much does your bill cost? Where does that come from? Retreat 5, you're going to start dealing with the governor's office. We're going to say goodbye to you as a fellow, and we're going to talk to you about some other professional opportunities of how you can be involved in policy. And so now I am going to kick it off to my colleague, Tanya.
Thanks, Marge. The most important thing for you all to know when it comes to cost is that this fellowship is offered at no cost to our participants, thanks to the generous support of many funders as well as individual donors. The cost of participation in the Institute is fully subsidized by the Women's Foundation of California. It does cost us about $20,000 per fellow per year for the WPI State. So it's quite a bit of money, and that's why it's so important that we understand that your employer or your community is behind you, because we view this really as a kind of in-kind grant to your organization or to your community, and as an investment in your organization or community. All of the retreats take place in Sacramento, California. You will be reimbursed for retreat travel, or if you live in Southern California, we will prepay your flights to Sacramento. If you will be driving or taking Amtrak to the retreats in Sacramento, we will reimburse you usually, but if paying for the Amtrak ticket or paying for gas on your way to the retreats does pose a challenge to you, we have a per diem system, and we will prepay that as well. You will receive a shared hotel room. This is really important. You will not be getting your own hotel room in Sacramento. If you do want your own hotel room, you will need to pay for it yourself, and that's always subject to the hotel's availability. We do find that the roommate bonds that are forged throughout the WPI year are some of the strongest and help really cement the inter-team bonds in the class. So the fellows are placed in suites. They're very large rooms. There's a living room, a bathroom, and a large bedroom. So it's plenty of space and does accommodate 2 people. Breakfast, lunch, and some dinners will be provided during the training. So all breakfasts, all lunches, and then usually we'll have about 1 or 2 group dinners per retreat. The other dinners, based on whether your organization can fund and can pay for your meals, or whether you can wait for a reimbursement, or whether you'd like a per diem, we have those 3 tiers. It's a 3-tiered system. So if you can wait for a reimbursement, we ask you to submit one. You'll receive one 30 days after the retreat. And if you are not able to wait for a reimbursement, we do direct deposit or we bring cash to the retreats for you. And each team is given $2,400 to cover the cost of working on their policy project between retreats. This is an increase. This year's class and past classes have gotten $1,500 per year to cover these costs. But we did increase that because we want to make sure that, when you're bringing witnesses to testify at retreats, you can pay for their child care, you can give them a small stipend, you can cover their meals, and also to make sure that you all can make as many trips to Sacramento between retreats as you need to make. So that is an increase from past years. And we also offer child care and attendant care stipends. So we know that many of you do have children or care for other adults in your life. And if that's the case, we do have a system in which we provide reimbursement. It's a daily maximum that we provide for at $15 an hour for 8 hours for folks who do need reimbursement for child care or attendant care. And then also if you are someone who who requires some sort of assistance or has a mobility issue or just needs any kind of assistance at retreats and does need an attendant to attend retreats with you, we will cover that cost as well. If you have any questions or concerns about costs, please let me know because we do everything in our power to eliminate as many barriers to access to participation as possible. I'm going to tell you a little bit about current WPI state legislation. And as I said, we have a current WPI state fellow on the call who will tell you a little bit about her team's bills. She is on the criminal justice team. And so I will be brief when talking about the criminal justice team's bills. They did have 2 bills this year, and Amber Rose can tell you a little bit about why. We typically do not allow a team to take on 2 bills, but there were good reasons why we did that this year. And like I said, Amber Rose can tell you a bit about those reasons. So SB 1392, authored by Senator Mitchell, did die on the Senate floor, unfortunately, on May 13th. It was a close vote, and it would have eliminated a sentencing enhancement that adds an additional year of incarceration for prior prison terms or felony county jail terms. And then the bill that is still alive is SB 1393, also authored by Senator Mitchell. This is another sentencing bill. It's a really moderate reform that simply restores the court's discretion at the time of sentencing to strike sentencing enhancements for prior serious felony convictions when a person is currently charged with a serious felony. So what that means is it restores judicial discretion. It gives judges the option to either strike the sentencing enhancement or not. It doesn't actually remove the sentencing enhancement at all. And so Amber Rose can tell you a little bit more about where that bill's at. The Economic Justice team is working on, or was working on SB 1233, which was authored by Senator McGuire. Unfortunately, that bill did die in Senate Appropriations on May 25th. This bill would have established enrollment in and completion of educational activities, so that includes community college classes, parenting classes, health and adult education classes, as alternatives for people who face financial hardship in paying traffic fines and fees. And this bill, it's really sad that it died. It came as a shock to all of us, and we believe what we've been told is that it died as a result of a committee consultant's misunderstanding of the bill language. So it's really unfortunate. The team did everything in their power to save it. They did everything right. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens in the policy process. And that's one of the things that the team has learned. The House team is working on AB 2299, which is authored by Assemblymember Chu. And this is a really important bill that basically makes Medi-Cal informing documents more accessible. It'll codify readability standards for those documents in English, and it also establishes a transparent and accountable community review process for translations of those documents. So essentially, just making sure that the people who need to access Medi-Cal services can do so and can understand and comprehend what their rights are and what the resources are that are available to them. The Reproductive Justice Team is working on AB 2785, which is authored by Assemblymember Blanca Rubio. And AB 2785 is a really exciting bill. It will require California community colleges and CSUs to provide adequate lactation accommodations to student parents on their campuses. As hard as it is to believe, not all CSUs or community colleges have spaces on campus where student parents can pump or chest feed. And so that obviously poses a huge kind of challenge to young parents who are on campus and who want to continue their education but are unable to because of a lack of lactation accommodations. And then we have SB 320, which is authored by Senator Leyva. SB 320 is a 2-year bill. We actually had a team in the class of 2017 working on this bill, but it became a 2-year bill, and so we have another team working on it this year. It's a large coalition effort that would ensure that all students at public universities have access to medication for early pregnancy termination at their student health centers. So essentially making medication abortion available on all CSUs and UCs, and this is a really huge historic bill, and yeah, really exciting for us to be part of it and behind it. The Trauma Justice Team is working on AB 2413, which is authored by a different assembly member too, and this will strengthen housing protections for survivors of violence and individuals in emergency situations who are threatened with eviction as a result of their calls to emergency services. This is a problem that if you don't work in DV areas, you might not know exists, that there's a long history of DV, domestic violence survivors, making calls to 911 and then being threatened with eviction by their landlords for causing nuisances. So this will strengthen housing protections for those folks. And now I'd like to introduce Amber Rose Howard. Amber Rose works for Californians United for a Responsible Budget, CURB, and she's a part of the WPI State class of 2018. As I mentioned, she is on the criminal justice team. And Amber Rose will tell you a bit about her experience in the WPI. Amber Rose, are you on the line? It would be #6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. Cool. Thanks for having me on the call, and thanks everyone for taking a second to listen to my about my experience. Definitely am enjoying my experience with the WPI. I'd say that I've grown a lot just as a person. I've learned a lot about myself from like the very first retreat up until now. A lot about myself is like standing in leadership spaces and learning more about what I want and why I wanted to be involved in policy. Also learned and I'm learning a lot more about working so very closely with so many individuals. Our criminal justice team has 5 folks on it, and we all kind of have different ideas. We have really different ideas, but just all the tools and ways that we were able to work together and get our ideas out and like come to agreements and unify in what we were pulling forward was really helpful. I think the WPI is really great at helping us understand exactly what policymakers do and exactly how impactful policy is on our everyday lives. So it definitely gave me more of a perspective on, just that power and how I wanted to help shift more of that power into community members' hands. So definitely great experience. We worked on 2 bills from our class, and like Tanya said, the first bill died. The second bill is still alive. The reason or a few of the reasons that we did 2 bills is that our author that we were able to acquire is Senator Holly Mitchell, ran an equity and justice package through the legislature last year where a few criminal justice bills were included. And so the idea of having a package like that again came up as we were shopping around for our author. And after like 80 different ideas on a criminal justice bill, we came down to these 2 ideas around sentencing enhancements. And because they were, you know, similar but very different bills, we figured that it might be a good strategy to run both bills. And so there were like a few different reasons why it would have been good to keep those bills together. Unfortunately, we weren't able to move it that way. But I will say it is very difficult in running the 2 bills. It is really double the energy. It's double the effort. So it takes a lot more coordination and organizing with community and with supporters to get those bills through. But I think a lot of times if you can keep both bills alive, it really can work out, or at least keep them moving through the same committees and in the same house at the same time. It can really help the process of the bills. But we are looking to be in Assembly Appropriations when we come back to the House, the House comes back from recess on August 6th. So that will be our last committee before going to the full floor of the second house, which is the Assembly, since our author was a senator. So we are looking to really move through and see if we can get the bill passed before August is out. And we're having a couple of lobby days in August. We've really just been coordinating, getting folks ready to turn up the heat when the House is back from recess. And yeah, still learning so much. I don't know if there's specific questions or specific things I should touch on.
No, I think that is good. If you could just talk about what you've learned and then some challenges and then any final comments to the potential applicants about what to think about.
Sure. Definitely something I learned, I think, is just about how useful it is to build relationships with people in these policy spaces. I, coming from like working in criminal justice, I think I sort of had that, like, they're all the enemy that Marge was sort of talking about earlier. And so I think just being in the process, understanding it more, having so many people who are lobbyists and former legislators, current legislators, staff, talking and working and building relationship, I think I realized, yeah, folks are not the enemy. Just because folks don't really understand things the way that we do or have the same perspective doesn't really mean they're the enemy. A lot of times having a conversation and these teaching moments that come up throughout this process really helps shift the way that things move. So I've just really learned how important it is to keep relationships healthy with policymakers and with folks who are in these spaces of power, even when things don't really go our way, but to keep healthy relationships in order to advance the movement in the bigger picture. I think a few of the challenges were just around really picking the right kind of bill. With criminal justice in particular, it's very controversial, all of the policies that come out around criminal justice reform. And so it was difficult thinking around, our group was really determined to pick something that we can move through this whole process with. And that was really key. I think that Marge, Tanya, and everyone else at the Women's Foundation kind of kept letting us know, hey, try and think of an idea that you can actually go from start to finish so that you can get all of the learning tools available in this process. And so just those, narrowing down the ideas was really challenging. And then keeping up the energy. I think those are the two most challenging things. Our team can keep up our energy pretty great, but there were still moments where it took at least, a couple people who had high energy to continue to nudge everyone else in support. And those roles kind of switched off. But just making sure you all are conscious of each other's energy and of supporters' energy and really trying to keep that momentum up throughout the process. And what I would leave with you all is that, this is a good decision. If you are able to work out all of the logistics with your supervisors or community and whatnot, it really is a really, really great decision to be in this fellowship. It is time consuming, so make sure you have that time dedicated and set aside to be able to work, to really, really work through this program. but you won't regret the decision. The network that you build into all of the people who are involved are so incredible, and you're really going to have your mind cracked open. Like, come with an open mind if you are accepted, because you definitely will be exposed to so much, and it's really all wonderful. So yeah, that's what I would have to say.
Thank you, Amber. Amber Rose, that was really helpful.
You're welcome.
And we will have some folks with questions for you in the Q&A.
Cool.
So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to go through the participant requirements and the application process really quickly. So the most important thing that I can tell you all for the participant requirements is that you should read the application instructions, and also you should very carefully read the applicant requirements agreement, which you and your supervisor will have to initial and sign. And you can download the applicant requirements agreement from the pod in the left-hand lower corner of this screen. The WPI-State 2018-19 Applicant Requirements Agreement will list all of the participant requirements that you'll have to meet to be in the program. And so just review that really carefully. Just so you know, the kind of key things that we're looking for are deep content knowledge in your issue area, a demonstrable connection to a grassroots community, the full support of your employer. Amber Rose talked a little bit about that, and we can talk a little bit more about that during the Q&A if people have questions. As Marge said, a commitment to attending all 5 retreats and all 5 webinars. We do not make exceptions because it does cost us $20,000 to put a fellow through the program. It's really important that you be able to commit to attending all 5 retreats, attending all 5 webinars, and your full participation. That's really, really key. The retreats are where we train you. And so if you can't make the retreats, you're not fully participating in the program. Also, the flexibility and willingness to be a good team member. As Amber Rose said, this is a huge time commitment, and we can talk a little bit more about the time commitment. I hope people have questions about the time commitment during the Q&A. We do say that you need to be able to commit up to 40 hours per month. That is a high estimate and does include retreats. And so we will talk a little bit more about what that really looks like on the day-to-day. And Amber Rose, I'm sure, can tell you a little bit about her experience, although keep in mind that her team was running 2 bills. So that might also affect her answer. And then the willingness to bring what you've learned in the WPI back to your community or organization. That's really important. As I mentioned earlier, we view this as an investment in your community, in your organization. Our goal is not to train every single person who wants to be a policy advocate in California, not only because that's impractical, but also because individuals are not necessarily the building blocks of policy, or at least shouldn't be in our view. We think that communities and organizations and coalitions should be the building blocks of the policy process, or who gets policy made. And so this isn't, as Marge said, we don't go into this kind of portraying this as a leadership development program, although you will have elements of that just by nature of what this is like. But this is also for your organization, and this is for your community, not just you. And then a willingness to engage in the WPI network after your year of training. And finally, daily access to communications technology, so email and phone. The application process. So the most important thing, again, is to read the application instructions, which is the first document in the pod on the lower left-hand corner of this screen, the WPI-State 2018-19 application instructions. You're really going to want to download that, read that in its entirety. So essentially what you're going to have to do is create an account on our online portal. You can do that by visiting the link in the bottom right-hand corner of this screen where it says create an account on our online application. So you'll want to click on that, create an account, and it'll take you through a series of individual and organizational questions. And then you'll need to upload 2 documents. One is the initialed and signed applicant requirements agreement. The other is your individual narrative, which is really the heart of your application. It's where you'll answer all of the questions that we lay out in the application instructions about your past policy experience, your reasons for applying to the WPI, your interests, etc. And you'll upload those 2 documents, as I mentioned, as PDFs to the online application, and then you'll hit submit. If you have any questions about the application process, please let me know. The issue areas that we consider core to the WPI are criminal justice, economic justice, health, reproductive justice, and trauma justice. If you have any questions about what you think or how we understand those issue areas or what falls under each of those issue areas, please read the application instructions because we describe them in full in the application instructions. You will have to identify one of these areas in your application as your primary issue area, and we are looking for deep content knowledge in that issue area, so you should be aware of that. If, however, you do have experience in another issue area or an interest in working in another issue area, please articulate that in your individual narrative because we do move people around. So sometimes someone will apply in one bucket and we'll end up moving them to another bucket because they're just a better fit with the people who applied in that other bucket. So please do just identify any interest you have or experience you have in other issue areas in your application. The selection criteria. So Marge told you a little bit about that, but essentially we're looking for deep content knowledge in your issue area, the ability to demonstrate how participating in the WPI will impact your community or organization and advance your community or organization's ability to do policy work, a commitment to learning and full participation, and again, the full support of your employer. For those who are wondering how we build teams, we're looking for diversity of experience, focus, and geographic representation, diversity of background, so age, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, gender identity, and then a similarity or an alignment or a compatibility of policy interests. And we're going to now begin our Q&A portion of the call. We do have a number of questions that came in during the call, so thank you for sending those in. And we will address those in the order that they came in. If you do have other questions, start typing them now because we'll take them, like I said, in the order that they come in. And if we are at time, it's 2:01, but we're going to keep going until we answer everyone's questions. So please send in your questions. If you can stay on, we'd love to have you stay here to hear the answers. If you can't, then we will send out the recording and you can view the recording. So the first question comes from Colette, who asks, hello, I have a question about how 501c3 employees can participate in this, considering the lobbying component of the program. This is a really great question. Thank you, Colette, for asking, because this is actually part of what we're trying to do, is teach you that nonprofits can lobby. The most important thing that you need to know is that we report lobbying on all of the costs of your participation in the program. So all of the expenses that are incurred as a result of your lobbying as part of the WPI are expenses that we report. So your organization doesn't report that. The only thing that your organization would be reporting essentially is your staff time. And we actually are going to have a webinar where your staff and board will be welcome to attend and strongly encouraged to attend, and we'll explain nonprofit rules for lobbying. And the short answer is that there are limitations and there are reporting requirements, but you can lobby as a 501c3 employee. You just have to track your time. Marge, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that is absolutely correct.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question is from Maricela, who asks, I have a question. Can multiple people from the same organization get into the WPI? That's a really great question. So The answer is that we discourage people from the same organization from applying to WPI in the same year. And the reason for that is that WPI is a huge commitment. It takes a lot of time, and most small nonprofits can't afford to lose 2 staff members to the WPI in the same year. It just takes a huge toll. So we don't recommend that 2 people from the same organization apply in the same year. There have been exceptions to that, but we would take that on a case-by-case basis. If 2 people do plan to apply, please reach out to us because we'd like to just be aware of why your organization is doing that. And then just so you know, we do encourage people from the same organization to apply in multiple years. So if your organization wants to put multiple people through the program, we just encourage the organization to think through what the best way of doing that is, and how to space that out. The next question is, there's a question regarding experience organizing. What is the level of experience you are looking for? Marge, do you want to answer that?
Well, interesting. Both for policy experience as well as like community organizing, is that, I'm unfortunately not able to see my screen right at the moment, but as well as for kind of community organizing skills, we think a good range is good for each team. Our fellows tend to have stronger organizing skills, but just not policy skills. So kind of, you know, it isn't a disqualifier, although we do want on each team for there to be at least a couple of folks who have really strong organizing skills. Do you think that answers the question, Tanya?
Yeah, and the person Alejandra didn't ask didn't specify what kind of organizing that they're talking about, but yeah, that's the answer that I would give, is that we are interested in all kinds of organizing experience that you have. So just describe any organizing experience that you have, and then we do consider organizing experience to be important. So so when we're putting together teams, that's part of what we're looking for. And Alejandra, if that doesn't answer your question, just let me know. And yeah, so essentially we're looking for any experience organizing that you have. So when we ask that question on the application, we mean any organizing experience. And the next question is from Judith Gonzalez, who asks, this is regarding the application on the individual narrative. We ask for a cover page. It's not a cover letter, just straightforward the information that is being asked, correct? Yes, that is correct. We apologize for any confusion that is caused by the fact that we call it a cover letter. So no, you don't need to write a cover letter, a traditional like job application cover letter. It's just a cover for your individual narrative. And yes, you just need to list out the information that you're asked to list out on that cover letter page. That's a great question. Thanks, Judith. Are there other questions? Questions for Amber Rose? Or questions, any other questions for Marge or myself? Judith asks, is the resume a straight one page or can we submit a CV? No, please do submit a one-page resume. It is a lot of work to go through these applications, and it takes us quite a bit of time. So sometimes CVs can get pretty long and turn into like 6 or 10 page or more affairs. So please do submit a one-page resume. And we do look to see if people are following our application instructions. So yeah, just please do follow those instructions carefully and submit a one-page resume. There is a question from Victoria. If we're applying under an issue area, but our area knowledge is a sub-area, should we state we are open to all sub-areas on that issue area? Yeah, definitely. If you're open to all sub-areas within an issue area, say that, and also describe what your specific experience is within the issue area. Yeah, we do want to see a certain level of flexibility because, as Amber Rose said, choosing a policy project can be really challenging for a team. And the team is going to really have to come together on an alignment of interests, but also on something that's going to make it through the whole process. And as Marge said, that's not always something that is, it's not always something that's going to be a priority for your organization or agency. It's not maybe the first thing that your organization or agency would want to work on. And so what that means is that we ask for a certain level of flexibility in terms of you coming in, being willing to work on a range of different topics. But it does help for us to know what your specific experience is, so do describe that. Any other questions? All right, well, if that's it, thank you all for being here. I want to give a huge shout out to Amber Rose for being on this call. It's a huge amount of time. It's like an hour and a half out of her day. So thank you, Amber Rose, for being on the call. It's a huge help to hear from a current fellow. So shout out to Amber Rose. And also thank you to the WPI and programs team summer intern, Sama, who is helping answer questions and helping with webinar logistics. And of course to Marge for your dedication and support and work on this program. A final reminder that the application is due Tuesday, July 24th, which is a week from today at 12 noon. So this is really it. If you haven't started working on your application, do so immediately because it's due a week from today. And we highly recommend that people submit